Okay, I'm just going to introduce our speakers. My name is Noelle Capriva, and I am the engineering librarian, and my colleagues and I, Joe Askins and Janice Dysart, are all librarians at MU Libraries. But we're not the speakers. We invited in some experts. Well, the speaker. We have two folks from Elsevier here, and this is their third visit. Well, it's Elsevier's third visit. And I was lucky enough to hear this talk the last time it was done, and I really enjoyed it, and I was excited that we could have Sarah and David back with us. Sarah is our customer success and engagement professional with Elsevier. She's based in Dallas. She has special expertise in digital analytics and in Elsevier's research technology portfolio, and she holds an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin. And our speaker is David Parsons. He's a senior customer marketing manager for Elsevier, and he's based in New York City. He's an expert in the scientific publishing process, which you'll see during his talk. He's worked in the industry for over a decade, and he has an MS in data science from Syracuse University. Welcome, David and Sarah.
Hey, thank you very much, Noelle and Janice and Joe. Thanks everyone for having us on campus today. So my name is David Parsons. Like mentioned, I have a pretty strong experience in pretty much every aspect of scholarly publishing. I've worked on textbooks, online products, most notably journals. So I mean, that's what we're here to talk about today. So if you have questions about any kind of products, just let me know. But today's focus is going to be mostly on journals and becoming a great author. So first things first, I'm going to put in a bunch of links for today. At the bottom, you're going to see, if you guys want, at the end of this, there is a survey that if you fill it out, you get a certificate for participating in the event today. We really appreciate it when you do these. It only takes about 2 minutes, but it really makes a big difference to us when we get help filling these out. So, all right, without further ado, also questions. If you have any questions throughout, there aren't too many people here. If you'd like to speak up, that's fine. I would also encourage you to just put your questions in the chat box, and Noelle here is going to help me sort of work.
I'm going to watch the chat for David. Yeah,
so whatever works for everyone. If there was like 130 people here, I'd say no, but feel free to interrupt me. I'm here to help you guys out. So let's get moving. All right, so today, what's our agenda looking like? In the next hour, we're going to be covering just a little bit introduction to academic publishing. Why journals in the first place? We're going to talk about what the organization looks like, writing your paper. What are editors really looking for when they're sort of reviewing your papers? Choosing the right journal, more important than you might imagine. I'm going to run you guys through some tools. Again, links are already in the box, but we'll kind of keep reminding you. What should you be looking for in a journal outside of the impact factor and just name recognition? I'm going to run through the peer review process. So what's happening behind the closed doors? It's not just an ivory tower. There is a certain process behind it. And finally, promoting your work. And then at the end, if you have any questions, obviously. So first things first, where do journals come from? It's about 355 years ago. Science wasn't really even science as we know it. This was really just natural philosophies at the time, and it was really just like observations of like weird things that people saw. So actually, one of the first links you'll see in the chat box is from the very first journal issue ever published, which was through the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. It was founded by Henry Oldenburg through them because he was basically just like a well-connected rich guy. And he knew a lot of people in Europe, and he just like always kind of like thought provokers and like thinkers of the time. But it's really funny. I put the link to the first issue in here. I mean, at the time, science really was just like, hey, I saw a really weird cow. And you can see that a little screenshot of that below here. The journal was not a very, very big success. It sold for $1 shilling per issue. Henry Oldenburg died pretty poor. I guess the theory or the myth is that he basically was only just able to pay his rent on what the journal made in income. So was not really successful then, but it laid the groundwork for what journals really should be. And what was the whole concept behind it? There were three sort of core tenets behind journal scholarly publishing. Number one, all these people are having these crazy ideas. So first and foremost, we got to register and archive exactly who came up with what, when, first. So, just the idea that, we have a registration of exactly whose ideas are preceding others. Dissemination. So again, at the time, it's not like we have Twitter and stuff. Communication throughout Europe is not really happening at lightning speed or even like at a human walking pace speed. So, the journal sort of, it feeds into this concept of like getting the news out there. So what happens in France, what happens in Germany or UK, at least there's some kind of outlet where those philosophical transactions are actually being read and disseminated. And finally, the most important part of this is the part we're here, the star of the show of journals, is the peer review process. So literally, a jury of your peers is taking a look at your work and saying like, yeah, that sounds legit. So those all together really are the core basis of what journals were and still continue to be. And that's why we publish in them in the first place. Now, of course, 355 years later, it's a little bit of a different scene. Basically, journals and science have grown up together since the beginnings, back in the 17th century. Right now, there are about 5,500 different scientific journal publishers out there. Most of those are all, single journal publishers. It'd be like the Zambian National Health Institute publishes a single journal every year. Elsevier alone puts out about 500,000 articles a year, which is about 20% of global output. We publish 2,700 different journals. It's no small number, but there are other really big publishers out there like Springer Nature, Wiley. If anyone here works or researches in the social sciences, you'll definitely know Taylor and Francis, of course. So the field is always growing, and journals and academia sort of always grow alongside each other. So it's a constantly evolving industry. Okay, so how is a journal organized? Who's behind it, right? So of course, as with everything else, it's people, right? So you have an editor, your editor-in-chief, your editorial advisory board, and then of course us, we're your publisher. Every journal also has a sort of defined aims and scope, and then there's also always a gauge of quality behind each title we publish. So starting with the editor-in-chief, what are we looking for in editor-in-chief? What is their role? They're the big cheese, right? So they're responsible for all the scientific quality. They're the final say in whether an article gets accepted or rejected. They're also working really hand in hand with the publisher. As a publisher, most of us have a publishing background, people from my end. And we, in the publishing industry, really rely on well-established, well-esteemed professors and researchers from academia to help shape what our content looks like. We don't want to operate in a bubble, and obviously, we want to have as much expertise as possible. So your editor-in-chief is really like they're your right-hand man in running a journal, and you really need to rely on them a lot for the direction of your product. So typically, what we look for are, is the person well known? A lot of times, it's someone who's like pretty well tenured at this point. They're not doing so much research anymore as much as they are like maybe running several labs. They might be emeritus. More than anything, we want someone who's well known, who can like really push and market the journal to their peers, get people to write for them. Our editor-in-chief, they have to have a lot of clout in the community. Below them, sort of just like any other industry, there's sort of different echelons of power in a journal. So below the editor-in-chief, you have the editorial executive board. Sometimes they're called associate editors, executive editors. There's all kinds of names to it. And there's no real rhyme or reason behind it. So if you see different titles, it really doesn't mean much, at least for journals I've ever managed. It's typically just like a legacy, whatever that, we came up with when we were forming the journal. But it's sort of an elite board of people. It's typically between like 5 and 10 people who their job is to cover all of the subsections of the journal that the editor-in-chief is not an expert on. So if you have the journal Gene, right, which covers all genetics, the editor-in-chief of Gene might be particularly he might be a particular professional in like bone genetics, whereas we need to cover someone who has fish, animal, plant, agriculture. You need to have an editorial board that really covers the broad spectrum of what you accept as a journal. Now below them, there's the editorial board that can be anywhere between like 10 and I've seen up to 1,000 people. It really constitutes the main readership, the main authorship of the journal, and also that board is typically handling most of the reviews that are coming in and out of the journal. What we tap the board for especially are we'll do surveys typically for special issues. Sometimes your membership on an editorial board is contingent on you submitting a review paper at least once every couple of years, which of course no one ever actually delivers on, which is frustrating for us. There's they advise on the strategy and future directions. We like to have sort of a feeder of people being interested in the journal. Just as like any kind of workplace, you have to have people who are entry level and just trying to get interested and engaged in the journal world. So that's the board. That's generally how it's organized. The publisher, what's our job? No, we're always getting into arguments on what Elsevier's value is. But we're providing overall management of the journal. We're making sure that everything works. We provide all the editorial infrastructure. So, all the systems that go behind submitting a paper, checking for plagiarism, overseeing the peer review process, making sure editors are paid, making sure reviewers are acting ethically. I can't overemphasize the amount of work we go through with ethical issues between authors. There's always a disgruntled PI whose grad students stole their work or vice versa. Also going back to what a journal publisher does is, or what a journal acts as, we're making sure that everything's being disseminated. We're making sure it's tagged, archived, indexed across, PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus, etc. Obviously, we also make sure that people buy your journals or buy journals, and people have access to read your work. So almost every library in the world has some kind of agreement with Elsevier or some kind of subscription. When you publish with large publishers, generally your work is going to be available to pretty much every researcher on earth who's working in at least a large institution. So that's what we do. The aims and scope of a journal. This is pretty straightforward. It's really just, what's the subject of the journal? What's our intended audience? There's always a description of the types of articles we're willing to accept. There's quality or coverage of fields. So, some journals have a higher threshold for what they'll accept as far as quality. So like particular population studies, stuff like that, or, only original research. What you'll also see in the aims and scope are any associations with groups. So if it's like part of a society, that's typically found in your aims and scope. Okay, alongside with quality, there's a lot of indexes out there, and I'm gonna run through a lot of that later on when we talk about finding the right journal. The one you most likely know is impact factor, which has a citation window of 2 years. If you ever see a journal that doesn't have an impact factor though, but does have a site score, they're extremely similar figures. Site score is basically the same as impact factor. We just cover 3 years instead of 2. So what is a citation window and how do we find it? I have a little schematic here. So it's all citations in this current year, or sorry, in the previous year, to all citable published articles the previous 2 years, divided by the number of all citable articles published those 2 years. So basically just like, it's a really simple ratio.
David?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wondered about the I mean, you just talked, before this, you were talking about the aims and scope.
Yeah.
Why is that important? I mean, I remember you talking about that before. Is that going to throw you off? Or do you want to talk about?
No, it's not. I mean, I was just wanting to talk about the general organization of a journal. But looking at an aims and scope is also really important when you're about to submit to a journal. You need to make sure that what you're producing fits in line with what the aims and scope sort of dictates.
So how close, I mean, how much do you have to drill down when you're looking at the aims and scope? Because if I want to publish, say, in oncology, that's pretty broad. Do I need to look more closely at aims and scope?
Yeah, you should, because I mean, yeah, there's a lot of oncology journals out there, but you need to make sure that they're accepting the type of paper that you're writing. So are you writing just a case report, a short communication, original research, a review paper? It shouldn't take that much. I'm going to run you guys through the journal finder and I'll show you a little bit, but you should be able to, they're not terribly long. So you should be able to figure it out pretty quickly.
Okay.
Also see the aims and scope typically in the journal submission system before you submit. They'll sort of question you on what you're submitting.
Are you sure you want to submit to this journal?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you still have questions after I run through journal finder,
Thanks.
hit me up. All right. Okay, so if there's no other questions at this point, I'm going to jump into writing your paper. So I don't know how this fish analogy sort of stuck, but now that I have it up on your screen, it's going to stick in your mind too. So a good way to think about writing a good research paper is sort of imagining this fish sort of swimming at you. So the first thing you see is obviously the face. That's going to be your title, your abstract, your keywords. Another way of thinking about that is like, if you imagine that that's what you're going to see in your search results, everything else is what you see after you decide to click on that article. So the head is really your, it's your elevator pitch. It's your advertisement to the article. The main flesh of your article, of course, is IMRAD. That's your introduction, methods, results, discussions. And then finally, at the tail end, you've got your conclusions, acknowledgements, references, supplementary materials, anything else that you're adding in. It's a good way to think about sort of building an article. But, a lot of times I think the biggest issue journal authors have is figuring out where to start. And I like this little pyramid schematic because it really shows like how you should start thinking about crafting your article. It's not a narrative. You're not telling some story, although we get a lot of those in our submission systems. But if you're ever struggling on where to start, take a look at your figures and your data. You've just spent months, if not years, on this research. So what have you got? I mean, you've got a hard drive or a cloud drive, anything, full of information. So with that, start drawing out what's interesting and what points you want to get across to that journal. From there, talk about your methods, right? So how did you get to those figures? How did you obtain that data? What were the results? You always need to have a discussion section, of course, which we'll run through. After all of that, then you can write your introductions, your conclusions, and at the very end, I would suggest writing your title and abstract. If you write your title first and have an abstract going, before you actually write the meat of your article, you're going to get caught up in trying to fit to that. And at the end of by the end of your paper, you may no longer find the title of your paper to be really matches the description of what you wrote. So I like to think of things in this way. But for the title of this, we're going to or the purpose of this presentation, we're going to kind of run through in a chronological order of what people read. So your title, you really want to keep it quick and simple, right? So again, I like to sort of have people think about, running through Google results or anything, whatever, Google Scholar, Web of Science, anything, Scopus. You only have a split second of people's time before they decide to click or keep scrolling. So you really want to draw them in. So you identify the main issue of the paper, talk about this, make sure the subject is very clear. Short, catchy titles are really great. People love clicking on catchy titles. And one thing I'd really like to mention is like, try not to rarely use abbreviations or, terms that are only used in your lab. If you make it sort of ambiguous and confusing to people, they're less likely to click on it. Always keep in mind that people from around the world are accessing your work, not just people at University of Missouri. So always make sure that anyone reading this paper from anywhere on earth is going to be able to understand within reason what you're talking about. Keywords, again, so this is SEO, and people aren't just reading through physical journals anymore. So you can't assume people are just going to stumble on your work the way maybe we used to 30, 40 years ago. So always avoid being too general. Words like, or phrases like drug delivery, mouse, disease, these terms are really overused and are generally not going to, there's much larger works and other things that are going to pull up results before your paper. Along the same strain, don't publish anything or write keywords that are too narrow. So again, going back to like terms that you only use in your lab or are really like niche and specific, try to avoid those. Just try to, you have to find that sort of sweet spot. But the best advice I can give you is to take a look at keywords at other articles that you've been citing. Play around with them. If you like put those kinds of keywords into a search and see if like you're finding similar papers to yours. That's always a really great method. But people on campus like Janice and Noel or any of the other librarians are really great resources for you in writing this kind of stuff. It's their whole job. They're experts at it. And generally, I'm going to mention this a few times today, like your librarians are always generally a great resource for you. They know journals in and out. They know the industry. They know everything. So can't overemphasize that. Okay. So next, your abstract. So at this point, you've got someone who is somewhat interested in your article. They've decided to click on the little drop-down thing that shows the abstract of your paper before they decide to click on it or, or get through the paywall. So this really is your elevator pitch to get people to read your article. So don't make it too long or onerous for people to get through. Again, you have only a moment of time before people decide to just keep scrolling. So try to keep it to one paragraph between 50 and 250 words. Bullet points are really great. I like this little figure on the bottom here. If you just kind of mention like what has been done and what are the main findings, that's really about what you should have in your abstract. If you get really overly verbose, again, you're going to kind of lose people's attention. Just stick to what happened, and generally, your work will speak for itself. Okay, so moving along, we got our introduction, and here, what an editor is really looking for are, I like these little bullet points we have here. It really is a checklist that editors do kind of run through. So what is a problem? What are the existing solutions? Which of those solutions is the best? What are its main limitations? And through your work, what are you hoping to achieve that like sort of moves to progress this area of study? So really moving from like generals to specifics. What the introduction is not a history lesson. So, you're very unlikely to have an armchair scientist reading your paper. And if you do, I mean, good for you, but generally you should go into writing your paper at the assumption that people have some kind of basic understanding of what you're writing about. So don't feel like you have to put everything into context. Just try to be mindful. Use your common sense about what you need to introduce and what you don't. Another thing I'd like to mention here is trying to avoid using really overused expressions. People love using novel, first time, first ever, paradigm shift. These are all terms that like are really, really pretty cliche at this point in the journal world. And you want to remain humble throughout the entire process of writing your paper. The best thing I ever hear is, like let the reader, let the editor, let the reviewer decide the importance of your work. The more you try to tell people how important your work is, the less credible they'll find you. So just try to remain humble throughout the entire process. So moving into methods, I won't run through everything here, but basically, what's everyone looking for? Especially in a world where we're moving into more and more open science and general transparency in science. All I want to emphasize is that within your methods, you really should be making sure that anyone on Earth, again, who is reading your paper is able to perfectly replicate your study. Of course, they're not likely to actually do it, but there are real repercussions now for people not including a method section or having incomplete or ambiguous or vague methodologies. It's increasingly scrutinized by editors and reviewers, so it's something that you'll see more and more being heavily criticized in your work. Try to use a passive voice and use supplementary materials if you have too much to really add in there. Results. Another great analogy is always the iceberg, but it really does sort of best describe what your results should be. You have a massive amount of work in front of you. And I know the intention is to kind of throw it all in there, but keep in mind, anything you publish in one paper, relevant or irrelevant to the actual topic of the paper, is considered published and unpublishable elsewhere. So only publish things that you're never going to need to use again, that are strictly relevant to the paper you're writing. So really just, highlight any findings that differ from findings in previous publications. This is where you talk about anything unexpected. And if you're doing statistical analysis, any kind of regression modeling, anything like that, that all goes into your results section. Along in your results section are mostly going to be a lot of your figures and tables. This is a really great way to get your point across. Again, I think humans are pretty visual learners, so a good figure, a good table can really make or break your paper as far as getting accepted and noticed. The only thing I'll say here is if your caption is longer or larger than the figure or table, you may want to reconsider including that. They really should be pretty self-explanatory. If it takes you a lot of work to get the point across, then the figure is not really doing its work. Just a couple of notes though, also on figures. Appearances really do count, and this is a point where editors will start to notice if your work is a little sloppy. So up at the top right here, I think you guys can see my cursor. Top right, you have just generally a vague figure. Make sure that all of your data points are clearly visible. Nothing's obscured. People are able to see true values. It's just generally a vague figure. On the right side here, I always think it's a tardigrade. I'm not really sure what that thing is. But you have the figure that's still in a foreign language. You always need to match everything in your paper to the language of the journal. This it just looks sloppy, and it's a sign to the editor that you just didn't put in that much effort. On the bottom, this is deep. It's not so important anymore, but you do need to make sure that if your figure is published in black and white or printed, if it's a journal that still has a print circulation, this bottom figure would come out very confusing and difficult to discern. So, try to make sure that anyone who's even colorblind is able to understand the point of your figures. Okay, moving into discussion. This is a really important part. This is how you're really selling your work to both the editor and to the reader. So I'm just you have a really simple checklist, just like the introduction. So do your results relate to the original question or the objectives? Are you providing interpretations for all of your results? All of your results, not just some. Are they consistent with what other investigators have reported? What are the differences? And why do you think that's so? Your work really does need to sort of line up with what's happened in the past in order for people to really take it seriously. What are limitations? And toward the end of your discussion, is at this point, do you feel like you're able to wrap up the paper, or do you still have more to say? If you still have more to say, you should go back into your results and your discussion and add more. Because once your discussion is over, you really don't want to be introducing any kind of new terms or making any kind of new statements. So really, this should be coming before. Your conclusions of your paper is really, don't recap your whole paper. I think it's like a knee-jerk intuition to just like recap what you just wrote. Please don't do that. Your reader already took the time to read your paper. You don't need to make them do it again. So just, present global specific conclusions. Talking about what's on the docket for the next experiment is really, really cool for people to see. People want to see that, this is part of a larger corpus of work that, is published in the journal, but as well as just like what's being discovered by the scientific community as a whole. You want to make sure that this is a piece of the puzzle that you're contributing to. Okay, your references. The best thing I could say is go back to the guide for authors always. I've had more than a handful of editors tell me that the first thing they look at in a journal article or a submission is that author's references. Sloppy references or references that don't match the style of the journal are typically an immediate desk rejection. It just shows that you haven't taken the time to read the guide for authors, and you generally probably didn't put in much other work. What else was I going to say here? Yeah, just, one thing I wanted to note was the publisher will not fix reference style for you. I think that's a real common misnomer that, we're a publisher and, we can easily just fix it. The answer is no. We're just going to send it back to you. It is your job as an author to make sure you're doing that. Just one other thing I wanted to note is try to avoid citing yourself too much. That should be a pretty much a given. Try not to cite manuscripts that are not yet accepted for publication. So that includes preprints. Of course, it's a gray area with citing preprints, but the understanding is you should be citing peer-reviewed works. Also try to only cite papers that are in the local language of that journal. If all of your citations in an English-speaking journal are to a French-speaking journal, it's not going to be very easy for that peer reviewer to really check your work. So try to keep that in mind going forward. Reference management software, pretty much everyone here probably already knows or has a preference. There's all kinds out there. There's Mendeley, Bibsonomy, Zotero, EndNote, Reference Manager. That's an old Reference Manager logo too. Again, talk to your librarian if you ever need help on getting good reference software, or you don't like the one you're currently using. Your PI, your librarian are always like really good people to talk to. They're doing the same work as you. Oh yeah, hey.
Oh, I just wanted to interject, and if Janice wants to correct me. Right now at MU libraries, we have workshops. We offer workshops in Mendeley, Zotero, and EndNote. EndNote isn't free for students anymore, so we're not sure. This is the first semester since that happened, so we're not sure what the impact will be on usage. We're still doing workshops on it. We're still helping you with it, but if you haven't started thinking about what reference management software you want to use and you get to pick for yourself, just bear that in mind.
All right. Thanks a lot, all. Okay, supplementary material. Only thing I want to add here is my 2 cents on supplementary materials is that it's literally just a file that goes to the back of your paper. Increasingly, publishers are discouraging authors from using the supplementary materials section. So just keep in mind that when you submit things into this section of a paper, it's not indexed anywhere, it's not searchable. So basically, if there's anything you want people to see, and you want to use in the future and you want trafficked, don't put it in your supplementary materials. Put it in an outside repository, put it in another paper. Just understand that when you're submitting to supplementary materials too, it's considered published work. So if you want to use it again, you're not going to be able to. And it's hard to cite back to a paper's supplementary materials when, again, it's just kind of a file. It's difficult for people to find. So we always encourage you to put yourself as much as you can, you know, big data sets, anything you want trafficked, try to keep it outside. But, you know, again, anything in there, it must relate to and support the article, of course. Okay, your cover letter. This is your plea to the editors, please review my paper. Unlike some job applications, yes, the editors do review this. They do see it and they do consider what you're writing in it. Couple things that you want to mention in your cover letter. Talk about what makes it special. So again, going back to like, you know, talking about other papers that you've cited from that journal that are directly relevant to your research and like how you feel like this fits into the story of the journal. That's a really good thing for editors to see, is that, you know, this fits right in with what you publish. Special requirements. Having suggesting reviewers is a really, really great thing for you to do for the editor. You know, it's increasingly difficult for us to find reviewers who are willing and able to review papers. So if you help an editor out, again, all this work is being done for you for free. So the easier you can make that job, the better. Sorry, Nolly. Oh, you're muted.
I'm so good at that. We have a question from someone wanting to know, should you only submit to one journal at a time?
Absolutely, you should only submit to one journal at a time. That's an ethical breach by submitting to two at once. I don't think we're talking about ethics today because we didn't have time, but yeah, submitting to two journals at the same time is absolutely a no-no. Okay, so just going back to reviewers here, you can suggest reviewers, and also you are allowed to suggest reviewers that you don't want reviewing your paper. So someone who works at a lab down the street from you, competitive lab. So is it a really competitive field? Are they working on something similar to yours, and are they likely to review your paper in a negative light? These are all things that are acceptable for you to put in your cover letter. So really quickly, here's a great example of a good cover letter. Yeah, we have final approval from all authors, very necessary. Explanation of research, the importance of the research, and any suggested reviewers. But you know, before we finish here, don't get it right the first time. Rewrite, write, rewrite, rewrite, edit, edit, edit. You know, I know you're excited. You know, writing this paper was a pain in the butt, but you know, you just spent a lot of work on producing it, and at the end of the day, it might sit in review for several months. And you know, you don't want to screw up your chances of being published. So make sure that what you publish and submit is as good as possible. Yes. You're muted again. No, you're muted.
How does suggesting reviewers coincide with blinded peer review?
Good question. Depends on whether it's single or double.
Huh.
It's kind of a gray area, right? So some journalists don't even want the author to suggest reviewers because they do want it to be completely blind. Generally, I would say you should have some familiarity with that potential reviewer.
Is that where?
Sorry?
I mean, how would you know if the journal doesn't want you to suggest reviewers? That's
sort of the tricky part. It's always, I'm sure everyone here knows, like there are just some researchers, especially like the stodgier old school editors and researchers, are going to be less likely to desire that. It's really luck of the draw, to be honest. I would always err on the side of giving suggestions.
Okay. Oh, and another question popped up. I saw an article recently that cover letters are not as important anymore since the abstracts are so front and center on submissions. Are reviewers still scrutinizing these in your experience?
That's a good question. You know, I've never actually been on that side of the journal, so I can't tell you definitively yes or no. What I've always known, though, is that yes, it's still something that the editors are looking at. I would tend to agree with you that along with anything else, you know, abstracts are getting more dynamic and they're a lot easier for people to see. I'm not really sure. And again, it's just like suggesting peer reviewers. It really is luck of the draw with the editor. You know, you'll get some of them who really want it, and some of them couldn't care less. I would just always err on the side of doing the best you can to submit everything that the journal's looking for. Don't take it for granted that, oh, journals aren't looking at this anymore, so I'm not gonna do it, or I'm gonna write a really short one. Again, you know, you're putting a lot of work into this article. I would just like try to follow all the journal's guidelines as much as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, got it. All right, quickly, we're gonna walk through choosing the right journal. Of course, obviously, take a look at the aims and scope. You know what you have on hand. So you know, if you have regional research, you've got a case report, you know what you have on hand. So make sure it lines up with the aims and scope, types of articles the journal accepts. This is all going to be found there. What's the audience? You know, are you reading the article, the journal yourself? Are you subscribed to it? And of course, take a look at recently published papers. Again, your librarian is a really great resource here. They know the ins and outs of journals. So, you know, Noel and Janice, anyone else on the call here, all really great resources. One thing I want to point out is there's, along with open science and open publishing, there are a lot of predatory journals out there. Now, I'm going to add this again into the chat here. I think it's number 3, the link here. Think, Check, Submit is a really great resource for you to take a look. Just a couple of red flags I can mention that Think, Check, Submit will give you. It's not a definitive list of sort of predatory publishers, especially I feel like as another publisher, it breaches an ethical boundary for me to give you a list. But you know, if a journal ever suggests that in exchange for a fee, they'll guarantee a quick and speedy acceptance of your paper, that's a red flag. If all of the editors on the editorial board are from one institution or one country, that's a red flag. Also, don't take it for granted necessarily that that editors you see listed on a journal's website necessarily are aware that they're on the journal's website. I've come across many times my editors finding out only through like seeing someone at a conference like, hey, I saw your name on this random Indian journal. I had no idea you were involved in it. I didn't realize it was a legit journal. And you know, they only find out that way. The best thing today to say, I would say too, is like, is the journal being indexed? You know, Web of Science, Scopus, you know, if it's not being indexed by, or PubMed, like if it's not being indexed by major indices, it's probably a red flag. If you can only find it in Google Scholar is not an indexing site. It's just an engine, a search engine. So don't take it for granted that you can, just because you see it on Google Scholar, it's real. Yeah, so basically that's it. Be aware of subscription access. Check out performance. I'm gonna run through this all right now. Okay, so right now, we're gonna take a little field trip here to the Elsevier Journal Finder. And I'll give you sort of the caveat that this is an Elsevier product, and it's only gonna give you Elsevier journals as a suggestion, but at least it can point you in the right direction. I'm just going to show you a couple statistics or things, couple data points you want to take a look at. So for now, I'm actually going to steal some University of Missouri work. We're going to do a little plagiarizing here. All you need is the paper title. Let's see, just the abstract. Here we go. What's this article one? Network design for local agriculture using robust optimization. you just put in your abstract. This is a really cool tool. You can add keywords if you want. You can add fields. You can refine as much as you want. But for now, for this, we're just gonna go here. So sometimes it catches me for plagiarizing, but not today. That's pretty good. Okay, so a couple things I want to show everyone here. And this goes, most publishers have similar tools that will sort of point you in the same directions here. Okay, so again, hopefully you can see my cursor. We're going to take a look at computers and industrial engineering. So up underneath the title here, you have OA and S in that little gold bar. That means this journal accepts open access type articles and also subscriptions. So you can pay up front to make sure that your article is free and available to everyone on Earth for all of time, or you can submit it for free, if you don't have grant money to do that. And after a certain number of months, called the embargo period, your article will become available freely anyway. Underneath here, we have your site score. That's that 3-year window of citations. We have your impact factor, which is 2 years. The acceptance rate, pretty significant to take a look at. 23% is pretty much average. 20% is really like the most common number I ever see. Your time to first decision, 13 weeks. That's not great. What is that, like 3 months, 4 months? My math's good. My math's terrible. 3 months. I studied English. So yeah, time first decision. So this is from when you submit your paper to when you get your first decision. So either desk reject, full rejection, accept, revise, etc. So 13 weeks is actually pretty long, but it's within the norms, I guess. It's a little high. Time to publication is after your first decision. How much longer does it typically take people to get their published work out to the world? As we move down here, you have your APC price. That's your author processing charge. That's going to be $2,570, which is actually pretty low for scholarly publishing. The embargo period, like I said earlier, this is the period after which your article becomes free. That's 36 months. Top readership, and then you can kind of just keep digging in as your subject areas, recent articles, and then like we mentioned earlier, Noel, the journal scope is listed right below. So it really should be pretty clear to you whether or not this journal is appropriate for you. But and just kind of pulling down, it's always good to look at if you have really competitive work and you're in a kind of desperate need to get your stuff out there or get a decision at least, it's good to take a look at journal statistics. So here's one, Omega. The time of publication is 40 weeks. If you have a year or almost a year to kill, then that's fine. Submit to Omega. It's obviously a very high impact factor journal, so it's got something. But the time to publication it's something to take into consideration. World development perspectives. This looks like a newer journal, but time to first decision is 24 weeks. If you got 6 months to wait, good for you. Otherwise, you might want to find another journal. So these are all statistics. Every journal publisher has similar kind of numbers available. I would just always encourage you to site score, impact factor are not the end all be all. So you want to make sure that the journal overall is a good fit for your work. It's not about just being in high impact. Okay, so if we have any questions on that before I go back?
David, this is Janice, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box for our library guide on where to publish, and that gives you a lot more tools besides Elsevier's tools, but a lot more tools for where to find journals that are good for publishing your research.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Janice. All right, so we've got about a little less than 10 minutes left here. I'm going to run through the peer review process really quickly with you. So here's a quick schematic on the peer review process. It's a little complicated, but I'm trying to move this thing here. Basically, if you follow this from the start, you submit the paper. Does it meet the basic requirements? Typically, this top yellow diamond is not even someone who's a journal editor. It's typically someone on the publishing side, so on our side, who's just making sure it's an actual article and it meets basic requirements. What does that mean? It means as a publisher, we get all kinds of people's novels, we get manifestos, we get, you name it, we have received it. NSFW and everything. So we weed a lot out from the very beginning. So if you're just missing critical parts of your paper, it's going to get pulled out of the system before it even sees an editor. So again, making sure you're submitting everything you need. If it does meet their basic requirements though, we'll assign reviewers. The reviewers will come back, give their recommendation. We typically want 2 or 3 reviews back before the editor makes a decision. Typically, like we saw, the decision is reject. But other times you'll get a revision required, and then you'll go through this process on average, maybe 2 or 3 times. But I've heard editors, talking about papers that went through like 8 rounds of revisions. Generally, your paper, things will go a lot smoother if you just address all of the reviewers' input instead of ignoring things. So trying to get it right the first time is always your best advice. So your first decision, that's that first window we talked about in the journal finder. Except very, very rarely is your paper going to be accepted on first pass. Get it 1K, celebrate your brains out. It's a really big achievement if your paper gets accepted right away. Unless it's a predatory journal, in which case, retract. Rejected, typically that's 40 to 90%. You're almost always going to get rejected at least once in your career. Just try not to despair. And the best thing I can tell you is you just got free advice from a reviewer, a peer in your field who took a critical look at your paper and gave you free advice. So just try, I know it's upsetting to get rejected, but the best thing I can say is, just keep your chin up, take the advice you got and try to run with it for the next submission. First decisions, otherwise your revision decisions, there's 2 different ones you can see. Your major revisions, it's not a reject, but it means there's some pretty big gaps.
David, I'm sorry, I was muted.
Oh, yeah.
Are you okay? Can I ask questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, sure.
So I have 2 questions that just popped up. As a master's student, is it possible to publish articles?
I don't see why not. Right?
Yay. Thanks, Monica.
Yeah, I think so. If
And
you
then-
research.
And then the next question was about the journal finder. Is there a way to search it by journal title to see the acceptance rate?
Yes, there is. I put the links are in the chat. Yeah, here. Oh, whoops, sorry, I just put an abstract in there. But if you scroll up, I have all the links included here. Sorry.
Can you sort by acceptance rate? Or I know you did a search by abstract, so it just brought it up.
That's a good question. Here, now I'm kind of interested. Sort by, so you can sort by time to publication. You can sort by site score, time to first, impact factor, and time to publication. That's what it looks like. Oh, you can also sort by,
Acceptance rate.
there we go. What's number 1? Wow, 45%, Rangeley Ecology. That's a good question. I've never really played around with that. So the answer is yes.
Cool.
You're making me do that.
Thanks, Diane.
All right, yeah, good call. Okay, so major revisions again. It's not a great sign, and a lot of times, your grant might be dried up, your lab might be closed. There might be a pandemic. There might be all kinds of reasons why you can't actually go back to the lab and do what they're looking for. So keep that in mind. A major revision, sometimes you just need to retract the paper because you can't do it. You can reach out back to the reviewer or editor and sort of rebut and try to get a different decision. But generally speaking, the decision has been made. Minor revision, awesome sign. It's not saying you're not accepted, but generally your paper has good bones. So it's generally pretty good. Everything's there. You just might need to expand this, move this around, adapt. It's not a guaranteed acceptance, but generally it's a pretty good sign for you. So that's also cause for a minor celebration. Okay, when you're coming back to your manuscript revisions, all I want to point out here is when you submit your paper to a scholarly publisher, your manuscript will always be assigned line numbers. And that's how your reviewer will give you critiques, generally speaking. They'll give you feedback by line number. And when you submit your revised paper, make sure that you do the same thing, that your you're giving a breakdown of exactly what you did to that reviewer. Now, you are able to rebut or disagree with the reviewer, but just please be polite. I think, people get pretty upset because it's very personal, because it's your work and it's your baby. But keep in mind that this reviewer took the time out of their busy research life to pay it forward, as a good researcher to take a look at your work. Don't make them regret it. So, just try to make their work, just be polite. Just be like, hey, I just can't do this. This is not, I feel like you're wrong here, blah, blah, blah. If you're nice enough about it, generally, hopefully you have a kind enough reviewer and editor who's willing to overlook it. Just the biggest thing I can tell you is just don't ignore what they're telling you. You have to try at least to address every issue they give you. But, you spent weeks and months working on this, just try again. You don't want to waste time in the publication process just because you're angry about what a reviewer said. So really just try to be as diligent and meticulous as you can in the revision process. Be consistent, check, recheck, just make sure you're telling a clear, logical story. And again, just take note of what they're telling you. Okay, any questions at this point? We're good? All right, got a couple minutes left. Actually, I got a minute left here. We might go over a little bit. Just a couple points here. Promoting your paper. Elsevier alone, again, we publish about 500,000 articles a year. If you're ever really proud of what you worked on, we want to help get your stuff out there. Our job is to disseminate your work. It's not just to take your papers and push them out. If you're really proud of your work, reach out to the publisher of the journal or the editor, whoever. There's always a marketing manager on the other side of that line who is always desperate to get content out there onto our Twitter feeds, into our all of our marketing campaigns. We want to promote our researchers and authors as much as possible. So if you have a cool picture, you've got a video of you doing something, you're just like so excited to get published in an article or in a journal, let us know. We're all humans. We're not just like some robot. Let us know that you got your paper published. We're always happy to do as much as we can to promote your work. Always use as much multimedia as possible. Getting your stuff out there, making sure it's visible as much as possible is always great. Again, going back to SEO, your paper is always going to be found on the web. So again, work with your librarians on good SEO, good strong keywords. Again, no one's going to click on your paper if you have a vague, weird title. So keep that up. Media relations of your own agency. A lot of times the university itself is able to sort of promote work from within. One last point I'm going to make here is, at least Elsevier article author is given 50 free share links to use across whatever platforms they desire. We want you to use them. We want people to read your work. So use the links. We're not just giving them out to make face. We really want you to get your work out there. So share it on Twitter. I don't know how much science is on Facebook these days. It's a lot of made up science. LinkedIn, Mendeley, you name it. Get your work out there. You're always going to be your own best advocate. Very final point, Researcher Academy. If you found this useful, if you didn't find it useful and you want to hear someone else talk about it, Researcher Academy is a free resource. Again, the link is in the chat box. There's a whole course on just becoming a peer reviewer. It's a peer review certification course. There's all kinds of stuff on publishing data, navigating the peer review process. We have hundreds of videos about the nittiest, grittiest little details of publishing. If you really just want to nerd out for a few hours, I super suggest going to Researcher Academy. You get little certifications for what you do. There's always new content, so I highly suggest going there. Otherwise, that's what I've got for today. Sorry, I'm 2 minutes over time. Again, this QR code kind of brings you to the survey for today. You can also use this bit.ly link. Just keep in mind we have the workshop code if you want to get a certification. We really appreciate your input. But more than anything, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. I hope I didn't talk too fast. There's a lot to cover in 60 minutes, but Otherwise, I can stick around to take questions if you like. Looks like we might already have a few, but actually, oh, cool.
Some people are saying, is it okay if I go ahead and paste that link in the chat again?
Yeah, go for it.
Much longer because but still, this is to the certification thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And just keep in mind the code here.
Yeah, the code.
Yeah.
Forgot about that part.
Very
Oh boy.
Yeah, but yeah, thanks guys. And sorry, my email is also on the bottom there. Anytime you've got questions, if I can't answer it, I can point you in the right direction. You know, again, we're a big publisher, but you know, we're a lot of people and we know a lot. So
can I ask one question before you leave?
Yes.
You know how you said we didn't have time for ethics? So it's not a question, it's a comment. Maybe next time we'll make more time because I'd love to hear more about the ethical issues that you didn't have time for today. That would be.
Yeah, I've got ethics and I've also got navigating data repositories.
Oh, that'd be great.
So authorship, so ethical authorship, you know, like when to put someone's name as an author, when not to, who is first author. We've got all kinds of topics that I can always come back and do. I've been breaking this into 2 sections lately, to be honest.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah.
There's a lot. It's a big.
In the age of Zoom fatigue, it probably is a good idea to break it down a little bit, chunk it out.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it.
Looks like everyone is saying thank you, but we're not getting any questions. But I'm going to hang out for another minute or so just to make sure.
Sure.
Someone's frantically typing right now. It's okay to keep typing, in other words.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around here.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming as well. It was great to see you here.